We are going to start your new year, your new decade off with a bang. Tana and I are going to do a 6-week live class. So starting January 21st, every Tuesday, we're going to be with you for an hour. And at the end, we're going to give away over $20,000 in prizes. We look forward to helping you kick off this new year by becoming brain health revolutionaries. Welcome, everyone, to a very special week of the Brain Warriors Way podcast. We have returning for the third or fourth time because we love him and he just will help you so much. We have neurologist Dr. David Perlmutter, who's a #1 New York Times bestselling author. He wrote Grain Brain and Brain Maker. I love both of those books. If you want to know about the gut-brain connection, Brain Maker's just brilliant. David's won lots of awards. He is a masterful teacher. His books have been published in 34 languages. He's been interviewed on Larry King Live, CNN, Fox News, Fox and Friends, Today's Show, Oprah, Dr. Oz. And, you know, I just think of him like a brother.
I think of him like a mentor. I've been long before I knew you, I was following you, Dr. Perlmutter, and taking your courses. So it's such an honor and a treat for me because I've started following you, 11 years ago? At IFM, 10 years ago, maybe. And I've been following you ever since.
I'm just going to say it's such an honor and a treat for me to be able to spend time with you guys as well. I think back to the time in Los Angeles that, Dan, you and I had breakfast together and got some one-on-one time, and it was really very, very special for me. And I really love what you guys do, the information that you're putting out, and I really honor it. So thank you as well.
Thank you.
So, brainwash.
Great title, by the way.
There's so
Great
many
title.
ways to go with brainwash, from what's happening in our society to getting proper sleep. Your
to
brain
cleaning
needs
your
to
brain,
wash
right.
itself. Why is this book next for you?
This is a level book. As you know, it was written with Austin Perlmutter, our son, internal medicine MD. And it is the manifestation of a conversation that he and I had in this very room, as a matter of fact, a couple of years ago, when we were lamenting over the fact that patients didn't do as they were told to do. Meaning, we were doing the best we can to learn as much information as we possibly could, spending our lives becoming as informed as we could, then doing the best we could to give that information out to as many people as would listen, including the one-on-one interaction with patients. And yet, most of the time, that information didn't translate into action. So we wanted to figure out what is keeping patients from understanding what good choices are, but not making those choices. And we began to explore the whole notion of how a person makes a decision, and whether that decision is short-sighted and impulsive, or that decision is based on consideration, for example, of the long-term consequences, good or bad, of what we decide to do today. In healthcare, that's things like, in our world anyway, the lifestyle changes, diet, exercise, sleep, you name it. In most medicine, it's taking the medication that your doctor prescribed. Either way, what we know is that most patients don't follow through. So we began exploring the neuroanatomical correlates of decision-making and realized that good, thoughtful decision-making that looks at the future is really a prefrontal cortex type of activity, an activity that comes from the front part of the brain, if you will, as opposed to more impulsive activity that comes from more primitive parts of the brain, areas of the brain, for example, that include the amygdala. We began to realize that so much of our modern lifestyle locks us into making decisions that don't involve the prefrontal cortex, that don't bring the adult into the room. And that it was wrong of us over the years to be thinking in an accusatory way about our patients and their lack of follow through, their lack of ability to make good changes. And that the deck is stacked against each and every one of us by the food that is so common today being pro-inflammatory, our lack of exercise, what we call sedentarity, our lack of exposure to nature, our non-restorative sleep, our disconnection from nature. All of these things disconnect us from the good decision part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, and we termed that disconnection syndrome because of all of the multiple manifestations that we see from disconnecting to the prefrontal cortex. Or as you, Dan, have called it, hypofrontality, as it relates to what you're able to see on your SPECT scans. The fact that the prefrontal cortex, that gift that we have as humans, other animals, of course, have a prefrontal cortex, but a third of our cortex is the prefrontal cortex. It's a generous gift that we've been given. That when we disconnect from that, we disconnect not only from making good choices, good decisions, but we disconnect from the part of the brain that allows empathy and allows compassion and tends to tamp down the us versus them mentality that is so pervasive today. So we really embraced how the world today really fosters our disconnection from this prefrontal cortex.
Wow.
Which is why you should never let a child hit a soccer ball with their head. And especially a little girl, because what I've read is 90% of their IQ is housed in their prefrontal cortex, where for males, it's more widely distributed. And we just don't think about it. It is what I'm now going to term the oblivious bad habit dragon, that people go through their lives without thinking, without using their prefrontal cortex.
Can I throw something in there as a patient? Because a couple of times now I've had 10 medical surgeries, but 2 of those surgeries, after surgery, I just didn't feel like myself. So I wonder if sometimes some of the things we have to go through as people to actually maintain our health can affect us so negatively. Just a couple of years ago, I had a surgery and I just didn't come out feeling as motivated, or I felt like I was walking through mud, harder to follow through with my own lifestyle. And so many people don't understand that when they, there's so many things that affect us, anesthesia, hormones. I mean, all those things are adding to that, are they not?
They are. And, one of the biggest players here is something that you guys have talked about for quite some time, and it's inflammation. And, people are embracing the notion that inflammation is a cornerstone of our chronic degenerative conditions, heart disease, diabetes, cancer, you name it, and Alzheimer's and Parkinson's for that matter, and depression for that matter. But, the recognition that inflammation is helping us disconnect from the prefrontal cortex is really profound information. Why? Because then when we can contextualize all of our lifestyle choices through the lens of inflammation, we realize that what's happening globally, for example, with respect to diet and the enhancement of inflammation that is causing, is changing the mindset of the world's population such that it's fostering more impulsivity, more fear, more us versus them, and taking the global population away from thoughtful decisions and empathy and compassion. Not just empathy for the other person, but empathy for our future selves and even empathy for the planet itself. So it becomes a bit of an existential discussion that we're having right now, which we've jumped to fairly quickly. But we're just centering, for example, on the westernization of the global diet, meaning the more inflammation being produced by the diet that's spreading around the planet. Yes, it has implications for chronic degenerative conditions. We know that. But it has implications for how each of us sees our neighbor, sees other countries, and sees the health and our role to play in the health of the planet.
Well, and the prefrontal cortex is also the mirror neuron system. So your ability to empathize or sort of know the mind of other people. And if we damage that, we really become self-centered as individuals, which then damages our marriages, damages our ability to parent effectively, and so on. Inflammation.
Can I comment on that real quickly? It brings up an interesting thought because, it's fundamentally important that we take a deep breath and try to embrace the views of another person.
Mm-hmm.
And that is to say, to see things through somebody else's eyes, from their perspective. Understand and embrace what another person's life might be and how they might see the world. You can call that walking the mile in in another man's moccasins or however, but we don't do that very much anymore. We dig into our frame of reference, end of story, and that is more and more deeply entrenched by where people spend their time, for example, on social media, that only caters to their way of thinking. We need to embrace other people's views. We need diversity of opinion. Diversity begets resilience, and we absolutely need that if we're going to make it through, some of the big challenges of our day.
That's so interesting. Just since with knowing our work and connecting it with what you're saying, that the few people I know that are hyperfrontal, that like have really busy, they're the opposite of ADD, rather than having sleepy frontal lobes, are super hyperfrontal. Like you being one of them, my daughter being another one, very much empathize with other people. Like always, the first words out of her mouth will be, but wait, what about the other side? What about, and I'm like, how does she do that? It's so young. And I wonder if part of it is that frontal lobe action.
Well, they're so important. Now, when they work too hard, it's been associated with OCD. And, I think of the prefrontal cortex as the brain's brake. And it stops you from saying the first stupid thing you think. Jerry Seinfeld Jerry Seinfeld once said the brain is a sneaky organ. We all have weird, crazy, stupid, sexual, violent thoughts that nobody should ever hear. But
that's exactly right. That's one of the major functions of the prefrontal cortex, is to really allow us to be emotionally appropriate in terms of our responses. So again, it is this we call this top-down control, where it exercises control over what would otherwise be impulsive outbursts, impulsive activity. And we see glaring examples these days in which individuals simply respond immediately without thinking. And, there is no adult in the room. So we've got to, recognize that we need to think through what we do, what we say, how we act. And it gets back to, we need to think through our decision making. So interestingly then, making bad decisions by eating, for example, the wrong foods, by not exercising, not getting enough restorative sleep, fans the flames of inflammation that further disconnects us from that very area, and it's a feed-forward cycle. What we bring to bear in the new book, Brainwash, are the ways to break those cycles. How do we jump back in and regain control? Otherwise, it's your teenagers at home when mom and dad are going to go away for the weekend, and the teenagers are there, and I might add, with 30 of their closest friends.
Right.
It's not going to work out really well.
Boy, that happened at home. You just re-traumatized me for when my daughter Caitlin.
You know exactly what I'm saying.
The house was under construction. I had to go away for business. She's supposed to stay with her sister. And my mom went over and found 30 children in the house under construction. One other thought before we have to go to the next podcast is when the prefrontal cortex works too hard, people end up with OCD. So if you just think of this break, it needs to be healthy, but I guess if you think of anorexia, it's their break is working too hard and it can't stop. So it's this balance. If the brake's always on, you can't get down the road. But if you don't have a brake, you're going to die.
Right.
And so keeping the prefrontal cortex healthy, not inflamed, is a critical part to being human. When we come back, we are going to talk about how to take control and strengthen the prefrontal cortex by new strategies in Dr. David Perlmutter's brand new book, Brainwash on sale January 14th. So by the time this podcast comes out, it'll already be on sale, and like his other recent books, will be a bestseller, and we'll do everything we can to help it be that way. Stay with us.
Appreciate that.
If you're enjoying the Brain Warriors Way podcast, please don't forget to subscribe so you'll always know when there's a new episode. And while you're at it, feel free to give us a review or 5-star rating, as that helps others find the podcast.
If you're considering coming to Amen Clinics or trying some of the brain healthy supplements from BrainMD, you can use the code podcast10 to get a 10% discount on a full evaluation at amenclinics.com, or a 10% discount on all supplements at brainmdhealth.com. For more information, give us a call at 855-978-1363.